point that I want to make is that in fact there are different groups within the phrasal verbs themselves. There are separable transitive phrasal verbs, and here, as I mentioned before, these are a large group of multi-word verbs. The verb and particle can be separated and they then follow the particle movement rule. So here, for example, the Coast Guard called the search off, the Coast Guard called it off, and never the Coast Guard called off it. These separable transitive phrasal verbs will always follow the particle movement rule. But you can't separate all transitive phrasal verbs. Another group of phrasal verbs are the inseparable transitive phrasal verbs, and the direct object will always come at the end of the verb itself or after the particle. So for example, we will always say I bumped into him and not I bumped him into. So you can already see the importance of understanding the particle movement rule, identifying the group that the multi-word verb belongs to, and then applying that rule as required. A third and smaller group of phrasal verbs are the intransitive phrasal verbs. 4 examples for you to see here. He dozed off early last night. There's no object in that sentence, therefore there is no reason to have to apply or think about the particle movement rule. There is another group called ergative verbs. It's not worth talking about them here. They're a small group, but we do go through them in after class and explain them in the same lesson in which we deal with intransitive phrasal verbs. We also have another group called prepositional verbs, and these are the only multi-word verbs in which the particle, which is a preposition, acts as a preposition. And this is important when you get to higher levels of proficiency, where you might be dealing with phrasal verbs in relative clauses, and they really come into their own then, which is why they are classed as a separate group. Here, for example, to comment on something, to decide on something, to ask for something, these are all prepositional verbs, and you cannot put the direct object between the noun and the preposition. He commented on it, she asked for them. Never she asked them for. Okay? The last group are called the phrasal prepositional verbs, and they often have one-word equivalents. When people mention or say that phrasal verbs should be avoided because they're too colloquial, it's generally this small group, the phrasal prepositional verbs, to put up with something, to talk down to someone. They're 3 letters. They can often be replaced with a more formal single English verb. Here, put up with is replaced with endure, and these verbs are actually a fairly small group, and they do not follow the particle movement rule.